I'm excited to get started here. So I'll get going. My name is David Yeager, as been said, and I'm a psychologist who studies adolescence. And my focus is on how to make young people able to transition, especially during times of difficulty, so that way they can cope well with stress and then go on to thrive. And in my presentation, what I'm going to talk about is a few different dilemmas that often happen in school. So let me just read this to you. So these are dilemmas that come from students in one of our experiments, and we asked them about a time when they felt stressed. And here's what the first student said, talked about being called on in class when they raised their hands. Every time I would not know how to solve a problem, after I had been called up to answer the question or problem, I started to feel my heart race, my blood pounding through my veins, my breathing quickened. And that was just the millisecond after the teacher called on me. I always thought that stress was scary and a bad thing, and that people who really knew the answers or were smart wouldn't feel the way I did. I thought it meant that I didn't belong in honors or higher level classes. And this is just a student raising their hands, right, in a normal classroom. Second example, taking an exam. Each time that I took a test, my heart would sink when it was time to turn it in. This would cause me to second guess my answer choices and become insecure about the answers that I chose. My heart would pound and I had a bad feeling in my stomach, and that made me believe that my body was telling me that I didn't know what I was doing and that I wouldn't score well. So these are very interesting to me from my perspective because the action of raising your hand or turning in a test is very mundane. It's something that students do all the time. How can it possibly be a bad thing? But what this student writing is telling us is that under the surface, there's a lot going on. Students are concerned about how they appear, they're concerned about their reputations, and that's having physical consequences for their heart racing, their palms sweating, the butterflies in the stomach, and all of those nerves. And if this is happening for something as simple as turning in a paper or raising a hand, it's probably happening in an even more severe way for many other events in their lives, whether it's holding someone's hand for the first time or trying to make a joke, or even something more intense like cyberbullying, like we just heard about. And this leads to a kind of modern dilemma if we care about young people's well being, because obviously the concern is that intense stress could lead to intense negative mental health consequences. And so, this modern dilemma is whether I should, on the one hand, give up on my stressful demands if I'm a student, or on the other hand, should I give up my mental health but stay on track for a better career? And that's a dilemma because what's more important? Your long term economic well being and prospects that come from engaging with academic work and challenging your mind and growing your abilities? Is that more important? Or is your short term mental health and coping with stress more important? And many kids make this choice every day, and some of them decide, I'm not going to work hard in school. I'm going to just reduce my stress. Other kids are like, well, I'm going to engage with school, but I'm going to be very stressed. And then neither of them feels like a good option. And so, what we want to argue is that there's the third question to ask, which is basically, what if we didn't have to give up either? What if we could embrace intellectual challenge and maintain stress resilience? So that's the puzzle I want to propose today. And I want to give a little bit of background on the stress response system that many of you may already be aware of, but hopefully this is helpful to suggest that there's a different way to think about this problem. So, is stress and anxiety and so on, are these always bad or are they sometimes good? To answer that question, you have to distinguish between a stressor, that's a stressful event. This is any demand that your body and mind have to respond to. Or on the other hand, there's a stress response, which is how you respond to a particular stressor. And that could be your mind's perceptions of the stressor. It could also be your body, your palms being sweaty, your heart racing, your breathing hard. Okay. Now, critically, a stressor, an event, is not inherently good or bad. So, turning in a test is not an inherently bad thing, and it's not really an inherently good thing. It's just an experience. Raising your hand in class is not inherently bad or inherently good. The stress response, though, could be good or bad. And the stress response could be basically, if I fail this test, my life is over. Or it could be, this test is an exciting opportunity to show what I've learned so far, right? So those responses could be very different, but the stressor itself is the same. Now, why do I make this distinction? This is important because when you hear a teenager say, I'm stressed out, what they often mean is their stress response is really bad. And what the adults hear is that the stressor is really intense. And so our temptation as adults who care about young people is to remove the stressor, right? Because like you're stressed out, remove the stressor. But often what they need is help having a better stress response. So there's an equivocation or a misunderstanding between what young people are experiencing and describing and how we as adults often respond. So what does it mean to fix a stress response? Let me show you a very simplified model. This comes directly from clinical psychology models, for instance, from James Gross. So I'm not making this up alone. And there's a very simple kind of process model whereby you've got a stressor, an appraisal, and a stress response. And so the stressor is the event that you're responding to. And the appraisal is the way that your mind makes sense of that experience. And so, appraisal is a term we often use when you're giving value to real estate. Like you have an apartment and you're going to sell your apartment and you appraise it as worth a lot of money or not a lot of money. And that's the intuitive version of appraisal. But it turns out that a similar definition applies when we name and value or evaluate our own experiences. And the key thing we're evaluating our experiences on is the ratio of how demanding it is to how many resources we have to meet that demand. And when the demand, so like how intense the stressor is, how much it requires of us to respond to, when that's very high and we feel like we don't have the resources to meet that demand, that's where you get a disparity that leads to a negative stress response. So it's a long way of saying that the stressor is, do you have to turn in a test, raise your hand, you get in a conflict with a friend, you're in a debate, you have to give a presentation. That's the event. But then you appraise it as something you can either handle or not by thinking about the ratio of demands to resources. And then your body responds accordingly. And this is important because if you can influence the appraisal, then you can get different stress responses. So let's see what this looks like. One type of stress response, which is these are both going to be high demand stress responses, is a threat type stress response. And in a threat type stress response, your appraisal in your mind is that you cannot cope with this. So demands are here, resources are here, okay? If that's what your mind says, then your body responds by, for instance, constricting your vasculature So your body stores more blood centrally in your chest cavity and less blood in your capillaries, in your extremities. And what that does is it means that your muscles and your brain have less oxygenated blood because you're keeping all the oxygenated blood centrally. And there's a physical reason for this, which is that in our evolutionary history, people, if they thought they were going to lose a physical fight to a bear or a lion, they would keep more blood in the central of their body cavity rather than in their extremities. So they would be less likely to die, basically. But now our stressors are not physical; they tend to be more social. So the adolescent isn't worried about being killed by a bear; they're worried about being socially dead because of, for example, cyberbullying or exclusion, right? Or embarrassing themselves in front of the class. And so if young people appraise those social threats as more than they can handle, that's when you get vascular constriction, and then you get higher levels of cortisol, and then you get worse mental health. There's a whole cascade of bodily and mental responses to threat type stress appraisals. However, this is very important. This same intense stressor could be appraised as a challenge. So, for instance, imagine a teenager who is trying to impress someone they have a crush on, right? If they think that person is going to just make fun of them forever, right? That's a threat. But if they think, oh, I can win them over, I'm going to get this person to get a crush on me or to reciprocate my affection, then it's still stressful, but it's exciting. And that's this idea that even though it's high demand, I have the resources to cope with it. And there, what you tend to see is vascular dilation. So there's more blood flowing to the periphery, to the muscles, and to the brain, less cortisol, often more testosterone, and then better mental health. So why do I tell you this? And you might know some of this already, but the reason is because in our society, we often want to just reduce demand to make things easier on young people. But what we really want to do often is increase support for young people and help them to meet the demand. And that puts them from the left column, the threat type column, to the right column, more of the challenge type column. And if we do that, then even when young people are facing intense stressors, for instance, in the transition to high school or transition to college, when classes are hard, they don't have friends, they have to make a new reputation. In all of those circumstances, they can show a challenge type response. And we'll see that in their psychology. They'll approach the difficult experience, but even in their physiology as well. Just to show you a very example of how we do this is we think this is the most complicated model in this talk, by the way. Sorry. So there are stressors in the world that have to do with your friends, making a presentation in class, or even thinking about problems in the world. So injustice, inequality, economic opportunity, war, those are stressors. Then they're appraised and then you respond. We create mindset interventions to shift the appraisal. So it's right in that middle part. And what we think is that if you can shift the appraisal, then the response could be more positive. And if you do that a lot, then over time, you can improve well-being and stress responses. The way we tend to do that is through something that we call a synergistic mindsets intervention. And this is a paper we published in Nature, which is a global science journal, 2 years ago. And we teach two messages. One is what we call a growth mindset. That's maybe something some people are familiar with. This is very simply the idea that you can grow your ability and change your skills with the right support and effort. Okay. And it's the opposite of a fixed mindset, the idea that you can't change. And then the other message we pair with is what we call a stress is enhancing mindset. And this is the idea that your stress could be harnessed to be a resource to help you perform better. And that's the opposite of a stress is debilitating belief, which is on the left here. And the stress is debilitating belief is that stress, if you're stressed, it means you're about to fail, you're going to perform worse, you can't do this. And so if you just read the top right box here, in the synergistic mindsets, we want them to have the appraisal that I could go from this challenge and I could grow because I have a growth mindset. The challenge is an opportunity to change. But I could grow by using my stress response. The fact that my heart is pumping oxygenated blood to my brain and my muscles will help me do even better. And so here's an example of what the intervention looks like. And I'll just read from this. We say things like, when we struggle to accomplish something we care about, whether it's a difficult math problem, a challenging athletic or musical skill, or an important personal goal, we get anxious. We tend to think of that as a bad thing, a feeling that gets in the way when we're trying to perform. But the truth is that stress response is exactly what your brain needs to take on difficult challenges and learn from them. Okay. And they learn more than that, but that's just the basic idea. And then we evaluate the effect of that message using experimental methods where we put people in the lab and we put them in an intense social stressor. And that stressor is something we call the Trier Social Stress Test, or TSST. And they basically, while hooked up to the physiology equipment, are surprised when we say, hey, it's time to give a public speech about what makes someone like you popular. And then they have to give it in front of somebody else, actually two people, who are sitting there with clipboards and white lab coats, judging and evaluating them. And they're like, so they're very hard to impress. And so the stress intervention is meant to have them think, okay, this is something I can improve at because of growth mindset. And the fact that my heart's racing and I'm nervous about this means I'm energizing and mobilizing and I'm going to do great. And what we found is that the short, one-time, 20-minute synergistic mindsets intervention. So it's a reading and writing exercise that I just showed you a screenshot of. It reduced what we call vascular restriction throughout this Trier social stress test. And the biggest effects is while they're supposed to be giving this speech, which in general is the most stressful part. So another way to say this, and what's amazing here, is that by telling teenagers that their body's stress response can be a resource, then we actually detected differences in their body's response to the stressful event. So the mindset led to a difference in how the body responded to stress. And that was really exciting. Let me end with some really practical advice, because I know we have educators in the audience, and I should say, I was a middle school teacher. I get it. I understand how hard it is. I also have 4 kids who hardly ever listen to me, and it's very frustrating. And so anyone here working with young people, I have great sympathy and admiration for what you do. But one of our challenges is to say the right stuff at the right time to help young people deal with their stress. And that's hard. So let me show you, to finish, some examples of what adults have said and what young people have said to themselves to cope better. So we did an analysis of kids in our experiment who improved the most in their stress when they got the synergistic mindset. And in general, what we find is kids who improved the most used what we call reappraisal. So if you remember, there's like stressor, appraisal, response. The kids who reappraised in the middle, the best, were the ones who improved. And I'll just read these examples quickly. Before the intervention, they were at the worst stress response. Afterwards, they were among the best, top quartile. The students said to themselves, I always thought that when I had stress and anxiety over work, it was a sign that I didn't belong in class. But in reality, my breathing and heart racing was my body supporting me to overcome hard challenges. A little bit of stress every so often is good because it means you are being faced with problems that are difficult and learning how to conquer them. Another student, again, started very low, worst stress response, ended in the top 5% of our whole sample, wrote, When I would stress out or get anxiety, I would give up thinking I'm not good at math. But it's just that your brain is getting deep into understanding. It's good to stress a bit because it helps achieve your goals and finish your work. So again, they're reappraising stress as a resource. What were the worst responses? And that's what we'll end on. The worst responses suppressed or tried to dampen down the stress response. So rather than have stressor, appraisal, response, and fixing the appraisal in the middle, they tried to suppress or squash the response at the end of the line. And here are examples of students who were the worst at reframing or reappraising their stress. They said things like, I cope with stress by taking deep breaths and doing everything I can to be calm. I tell myself affirmations, and they are very helpful. So next time you get stressed, you should take a breath and give yourself a compliment. Don't stress about it. One mistake isn't going to ruin your life. And remember to always know if you don't understand, don't be afraid to ask for help. Another, tell him not to worry and try to encourage them as much as I can to help them. Another, as long as you believe in yourself, you can do anything. I know it can be stressful, but later on you'll realize there's nothing to be stressed about. Or, kid, don't let stress get over you. You don't have to get rid of it. The only thing you can do is relax or fake that you are relaxed. Now, those in general are things that many of us might say to ourselves or might tell kids to say to themselves if you believe the stress is debilitating worldview, that stress is always bad. But because that's what kids believe, then they say this kind of stuff for themselves to suppress and squash the stress response, and that tends to not work. So just to wrap up, I want to show just as a punchline, the worst kinds of responses and the best kinds of responses. And as you look at this, think, wow, or at least what a lot of people tell me they say is, wow, the worst responses are stuff that I say all the time. So they're things like, don't worry about it, just do what you can, take deep breaths, give yourself a compliment, take your time, believe in yourself. That's all suppression. It tends not to work. Whereas reframing, use stress as an advantage. This is on the left. Stress helps you push yourself. Your body is getting ready. Stress is your body supporting you. All of those things are more in line with this stress is enhancing view, and we're associated with better health and well-being outcomes. So I'm going to end there. And then the big takeaway is I'm also happy to make this intervention available to educators to use. And I think the next wave of innovation is in folks who figure out how to help kids say less of the stuff on the right to themselves and more of the stuff on the left, but also how do we help the adults in kids' lives to make a better, more positive, more powerful appraisal of everyday stressors, especially those that are so critical to growth and development. For example, taking on challenges in school, forming new relationships, or even coping with bullying and so on. So thank you much for your attention, and I look forward to the question and answers. Thank you very much.